Did you catch what Trump said on Monday? He wants Republicans to nationalize the elections, seize control of the electoral process in 15 states, and put it under Republican control. Before we begin, I'd really appreciate it if you could like this video. It helps the algorithm show it to a wider audience. And please leave a comment with your thoughts. Let's discuss. That's literally what he said in an interview with Dan Bongino, his former deputy FBI director. Republicans should say, "We want to take control. We should take control of the voting in at least 15 places. Republicans should nationalize the vote." And here's the thing, folks. This directly violates the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 4 explicitly states that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. States control elections, not the federal president. But Trump doesn't care. He's openly trashing the Constitution and basically saying if Republicans can't win fair and square, they should just hijack the electoral process itself. Robert Kagan, the Atlantic writer, said something extraordinarily disturbing in an NPR interview yesterday. "We're on the cusp of consolidating a dictatorship. Let me break down exactly why this situation is so dangerous, what norms and laws Trump is violating, and why we all need to take this extremely seriously. Let's start with what nationalizing elections would actually mean. The U.S. Constitution establishes a federal system where states have primary power to administer elections. This is by design. The founders wanted power dispersed, not concentrated in the hands of one person or one party. Each state decides its own voting procedures, how long polls stay open, whether they allow mail-in voting, how they verify voter identity, how they count ballots. Congress can pass certain federal laws that modify how states run elections, like they did with the Voting Rights Act, but states still actually manage the elections. So when Trump says he wants Republicans to take control of voting in 15 states, he's essentially proposing that the federal government or the Republican Party override these states' constitutional power to run their own elections. This is blatantly unconstitutional. Even Republican Senator Rand Paul said so. That's not what the Constitution says. But here's what's really alarming. Trump isn't just making vague comments. He's already taking concrete steps that suggest he's dead serious. On January 14th, the FBI raided the home of Hannah Nathanson, a Washington Post reporter, as part of an investigation into whether a government contractor shared classified documents. This marks the first time the federal government has searched a journalist's home looking for evidence of a leak. Simultaneously, the FBI issued a subpoena to the Washington Post, demanding they produce communications between the contractor and any other Washington Post employees. This is a direct assault on press freedom. The Defense Department already issued a new media policy back in September that conditions Pentagon media access on journalists agreeing to obtain prior approval for what they publish, including unclassified information. You heard that right. Prior approval. That's straight-up censorship. And then there's Georgia. Last Wednesday, federal authorities executed a search warrant at Fulton County's main election office as part of an ongoing investigation. Fulton County includes Atlanta, a heavily Democratic city in a swing state that voted for Biden in 2020. The FBI seized ballots and other voting-related documents. Trump wants to do this in other states too, including Minnesota. Last month, Attorney General Pam Bondi went so far as to demand access to Minnesota's voter rolls as a condition for restoring public order amid tensions over the administration's aggressive immigration crackdown. See the pattern? Trump is using federal law enforcement to intimidate states, to grab their election records, to build a national voter database he can then use to challenge election results or discredit future elections. The Justice Department has requested detailed voter registration data from over 30 states. The concern, according to the New York Times, is that Trump could ultimately use the data to revive stolen election lies or try to discredit future election outcomes. And here's what makes this even more sinister. Trump already tried to overturn an election. On January 6, 2021, he incited a mob to attack the Capitol to prevent certification of the 2020 election. He called state election officials and pressured them to find votes for him. He created fake electors. All of this is documented, proven, and now he's back in the White House, and this time, he has way more power because he's purged all the government officials who might resist him and replaced them with absolute loyalists. Robert Kagan said something absolutely chilling in his interview with Terry Gross on NPR. He said, "I don't know what Trump has to do other than stand on the roof of the White House screaming that he has no intention of allowing a fair election in 2026, but that's essentially where we are now. And to me, the question is, who's going to stand up and prevent this from happening?" Kagan thinks we're already well into a dictatorship. It's just a question of whether Trump will go ahead and essentially disrupt the 2026 elections, which he's now clearly indicated he intends to do. Kagan says, this should be a 5-alarm fire for everybody. Now let's talk about the other norms and laws Trump is violating. There's Minneapolis, where ICE agents inflicted mortal injuries on Renee Nicole Good, an American citizen, and shot Alex Preddy, a legal observer. These incidents were captured on video, widely broadcast. There's no mystery about what happened. And what was the Trump administration's response? No pause, no contrition, no acceptance of responsibility. ICE kept moving forward, resisting accountability and doubling down on denial. Meanwhile, Trump deployed 2,000 federal agents to Minneapolis, the largest immigration enforcement operation ever conducted, essentially turning an American city into a war zone. And then there are the tariffs. Trump imposed massive tariffs on allies, on Canada, on Europe, without proper congressional approval. Courts have ruled many of his tariffs invalid because he imposed them by invoking national security emergency authorities that are abuses of presidential power. But Trump keeps doing it anyway. He ignores court rulings, he ignores Congress, he acts like constitutional checks and balances don't apply to him. There are the military operations. Trump conducted an unauthorized military operation against Iran in June 2025. He conducted a military operation against Venezuela in January 2026, capturing President Maduro. He's threatened to invade Greenland. None of these actions were authorized by Congress. The Constitution is clear. Congress declares war, not the president. But Trump acts like he's a king who can wage war whenever he wants, wherever he wants, without anyone's permission. And then there's the so-called Board of Peace that Trump created as an alternative to the UN. He invited Vladimir Putin, a war criminal wanted by the ICC, to be part of it. He excluded most European democracies. This is essentially Trump trying to create his own world order where he and other dictators can cooperate without being constrained by international law or democratic norms. Kagan said something else important. He said everything now is about power, raw power. We're out of the realm of legality. And that's true. Trump doesn't even pretend to respect the law anymore. He openly says he'll do what he wants, and if anyone tries to stop him, he'll use federal government power to crush them. This is what dictators do. They accumulate power, they eliminate checks and balances, they intimidate or eliminate opposition, they control information, and eventually they suspend or rig elections. And here's the scariest part. Kagan said he doesn't think the courts will necessarily stop him. The various federal courts can, but the Supreme Court has demonstrated a willingness to let him do whatever he wants. And as soon as a president gets into the realm of national security and starts declaring national security reasons why he has to do certain things, traditionally, the court backs off. The worst judicial decision of the last 100 years was Korematsu, which was the internment of the Japanese, which the court ruled, well, the president's making a national security determination. So Trump knows he can do pretty much anything if he frames it as a national security issue. And that's exactly what he's doing. He says illegal immigrants are a national security threat, so he can deploy federal forces in American cities. He says election fraud is a national security threat, so he can seize election records and build national voter databases. He says Iran is a national security threat, so he can launch military strikes without congressional authorization. Everything becomes national security, and once it's national security, the courts back off, and Congress feels powerless. Kagan also pointed out that the Republican Party has become the party of dictatorship. People focus so much on Trump, but Trump's not alone. He's got Stephen Miller, Russell Vought, other people who are also major figures pushing him in this authoritarian direction. And most Republicans in Congress either actively support him or are so terrified of him that they stay silent. Even when he openly proposes nationalizing elections, violating the Constitution, most Republicans say nothing. Rand Paul is the exception, not the rule. So what happens next? Kagan thinks Trump has made it clear he has no intention of allowing the 2026 elections to proceed fairly if Democrats are likely to win. He knows perfectly well that, in effect, his presidency will be greatly diminished once Democrats take one or both houses of Congress. He himself is now saying he'll be impeached, and that's why he wants to prevent Democrats from taking power. And he now has at his disposal enormous and powerful power, literally the forces of power, what they would call in another country the power ministries. He has total control of them. So here are the possible scenarios for 2026. Scenario 1. Elections happen normally in November, Democrats win control of the House or Senate or both, and Trump peacefully accepts the results. This is the best case, but frankly, based on everything we've seen, this seems extremely unlikely. Trump has never accepted an electoral defeat in his life. He even claimed he won the popular vote in 2016 when he lost it by 3 million votes. He spent 4 years lying about election fraud in 2020. Why would he suddenly accept defeat in 2026? Scenario 2. Elections happen, Democrats win, but Trump refuses to accept the results. He claims massive election fraud, uses his voter databases and seized records to manufacture evidence, orders the Justice Department to investigate, maybe even arrest Democratic election officials. He calls his supporters into the streets. You basically get January 6, 2021 all over again, but this time across the country in multiple states, and with Trump controlling the entire federal government apparatus. Scenario 3, and this is the darkest. Trump disrupts the elections so much in advance that they can't proceed normally. Maybe federal agents seize voting equipment in key Democratic districts. Maybe they arrest election officials in swing states. Maybe Trump declares a national emergency a few weeks before the election, invokes extraordinary powers, postpones the elections indefinitely. This sounds like science fiction, but Trump literally proposed postponing the 2020 election because of COVID. He couldn't do it then because he didn't have enough control over the government. Now he does. Let me be crystal clear about something. I'm not making alarmist predictions for the sake of alarming people. I'm analyzing what Trump is actually saying and what he's actually doing. He says he wants to nationalize elections. That's unconstitutional, and it signals his intent not to allow elections to be free and fair if he thinks he's going to lose. He's building a national voter database by seizing records from states. He's deploying federal forces to intimidate the opposition. He's attacking the free press. He's ignoring court rulings. He's openly violating the Constitution. These are all classic signs of a leader consolidating dictatorial power. And here's the most important question. Who's going to stop him? The Republican Congress won't. They're either complicit or cowards. The Supreme Court probably won't. It's shown it'll let him do whatever he wants. The military? Hopefully they'd honor their oath to the Constitution rather than to Trump, but we can't be sure. That leaves the American people, and this is where it gets really critical. If Trump tries to disrupt the 2026 elections, if Democrats win and he refuses to accept the results, ordinary Americans will have to decide whether they'll defend their democracy or allow it to be dissolved. Kagan said this should be a 5-alarm fire for everybody. He's right. We're not exaggerating. We're not hysterical. We're soberly looking at what Trump is saying and doing and drawing logical conclusions. A president who calls for nationalizing elections, who builds voter databases to challenge results, who deploys federal forces to intimidate opposition, who attacks the free press, who ignores the courts and Congress. That's a president moving toward dictatorship. And we're on the edge, the absolute edge, of losing American democracy as we know it. The next 9 months are absolutely critical. If we get to November and elections proceed normally and fairly and the results are accepted by all parties, then we'll have avoided the worst. But if Trump succeeds in disrupting, rigging, or canceling the elections, then America will no longer be a functioning democracy. It'll be an elective autocracy at best, an outright dictatorship at worst. And once you lose democracy, getting it back is extraordinarily difficult. Look at Russia, look at Turkey, look at Hungary. Once an authoritarian leader consolidates power, reversing course takes years, decades, sometimes generations. So watch very carefully what happens over the coming months. Every attempt by Trump to grab more control over the electoral process, every move toward building his voter database, every deployment of federal forces to intimidate opposition, these are all alarm bells. And we all need to decide whether we're going to stand up and defend democracy or stay passive and watch it die. It's that simple and that terrible. Stay vigilant, folks. The future of American democracy is at stake.